So I've seen the term taste come up a lot lately. And I think as someone who didn't start off in art and design, I studied psychology. I did a few odd jobs and traveled for a couple of years and then went back to school to study design. I think that we talk about taste like it's this innate thing that some people have, others don't. And I kind of just don't think that's true. I think that there are people who definitely have better taste, but I also think that it's a skill, and like any other, you can get better at it. And so I compiled a list of 5 ways with a special bonus, if you watch to the end, of ways that you can improve your taste. Okay, so number one is to deepen your understanding of culture. I think that a lot of creative careers are gatekept, and so fortunately and unfortunately, the perception of your taste does matter in a lot of ways. And I came across this quote from a German philosopher named Kant. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly, but I'll paraphrase what he said. He basically said that good taste does exist, but it's concretely impossible to define it. And in my opinion, I think that bad taste is easier to identify than good taste. And maybe that's because it's subjective, but I also think that has something to do with culture. Like, one of the examples I can think of is the new thing at the White House with all of the, I don't know what it's called, but it's like a bunch of, pictures of past presidents, and it's really gold and gaudy and is so disconnected from how a lot of people are feeling right now. And to me, that is an example of bad taste. And sometimes I wonder if the things I'm looking at online are things that actually interest me, or if there are things that the algorithm has just served up because it thinks that I would be interested. And that kind of makes me question, the things that I like, have I actually naturally gravitated towards them? Would I now? It kind of feels like we're being served up things in all areas on the internet. So there's something really powerful about recognizing that and then figuring out how to go after the things that are actually interesting to you. And so I feel like for me, the things that interest me are reading the thoughts of other people, reading newsletters, reading books, going to theater, reading a book review, watching movies, all of these things that I'm like slowly being exposed to other people's thoughts, other people's summaries of culture, understanding of culture that kind of help me inform my own. And that leads me to number 2, which is to develop a focused approach to how you absorb inspiration. And when I say absorb, notice that I didn't say consume. I think consuming kind of gives this passive quality and doesn't always allude to what's happening when you take the time to expose your brain to things. You are basically slowly changing your perspective. You're slowly changing what you think is interesting or cool, whether that's active or passive. I think a way that you can really focus in on how you want to develop your taste is creating goals for what kinds of things you are interested in. So I feel like on a broad sense, you could create goals like, I'm trying to get better at film and photography. I have a graphic design background, and so in a lot of ways, I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm watching a lot of YouTube videos on photography. I'm reading newsletters on art direction and photo shoots, and it's slowly helping me understand how to have a better eye for this craft. Okay, and number 3 is a quote actually from a professor that I had. And he said, "You're only as strong as your most obscure inspo," which, let me break it down. I think there's this really interesting play that happens when you have an understanding of culture, but then you also are able to bring in ideas or thoughts or even like a style of craft that people aren't aware of or people overlooked, stuff like that. And I think that's how you create something that feels really fresh and how you actually can create trends and cut through the noise. And there's something about obscure inspo where you can really get your niche on. That is to say, like, what do you want to nerd out about? How can you bring that to people and make them as interested as you are. I think that there's a lot of passion that can go into finding an obscure and niche inspiration. And it is also how we start to change culture, actually. My fourth recommendation is to test out your ideas. And so I don't think that this necessarily has to be, you know, showing everyone. Some things don't really need to see the light of day, but trying things out, experimenting, having fun. And I think when you test out ideas, you start to develop more of an intuitive understanding of what you like or what you think is worth your time creating or worth your time engaging with. And I guess also with testing out ideas, it doesn't even have to be fully what your craft is. It could be writing down ideas. It could be creating a mood board. It could be going to the library and researching a topic and doodling your notes. Like it really doesn't have to be something intense. I think the point is to be able to enjoy it and try things and get lost in the process. And the fifth recommendation that I have is to get critiqued or at the very least show your work to other people. And I think of a question that I've gotten from a few emerging creatives about if it's worth it to go to school or not. Like I went back to school, I went back to a community college, so it was a pretty affordable process for me. I think there is a good question of what value do you get from those kinds of things? And I think getting your work critiqued by people who are very good at what they do is a huge part of developing your taste. And not necessarily, just getting your work ripped apart by people, but getting the why behind why something is interesting to people or it doesn't totally hit. And I think the more that you can get to the why and figure out ways where you actually agree with them or you disagree or you had a feeling about when you created this thing and you don't feel like it fully landed and you didn't know why. I think that that's where you can really stand on the shoulders of giants and just like get to the better ideas faster. For critiques to be beneficial, I also don't think that you have to show, a finished product or anything. I think you can also run some ideas by people or show a mood board. And I found that actually getting critiqued on a mood board is really helpful. And I know that these last two kind of focused on skill building. It feels like I'm also talking about, getting better at your craft. But I think there's something to be said about how much of a revolving door it is to get better at your craft and work on those skills, and then how that also improves your taste. I think that the two inform each other. And I also think that taste can be really passive. I think when we talk about it, sometimes it's just watching a video and having a gut reaction where you like something or don't like something. And I think that passive expertise comes from a lot of action and a lot of diligent work. Okay, and my bonus recommendation is to spend as much time offline as possible. I've found that limiting my time on social media, on all of these different apps that somehow feel like social media to my brain, have just been so powerful. Like, it feels silly to say I decided to not have my phone in my bedroom anymore. I got a physical alarm clock, and the amount of stress that I feel in the morning is way less than when I would wake up and just start scrolling on things. And I know this might sound silly to a lot of people who didn't grow up in the internet age, but I think we're all in the same boat when I say that technology has been really encroaching on our time. And I think there's a lot of power in using something that is devoted to one purpose. A paintbrush isn't as distracting as the entire internet. You know what I mean? So thank you for listening or watching. I am really curious to hear other people's thoughts. Did I miss anything? Do you have a completely different perspective? Let me know in the comments or a DM, and I'll catch you next time.